welcome to Compliance Roadmap, Understanding Timelines and Drummond Resources for the HTI-1 Final Rule. Heather Kelty, Director of ONC-ACB Certification Body, and James Threatte, Director of ONC-ATL Test Lab, will be providing you with an overview of important changes, ONC compliance timelines, Drummond timelines, and more. Before I pass it over to the speakers, I'd like to mention that the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen can be used to ask questions throughout the webinar, and your questions will be addressed during the Q&A portion at the end. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a copy of that recording via email by tomorrow. And with that said, I'm going to pass it over to the speakers.
Thank you, Lynn. So today our webinar will be about a compliance roadmap and timeline for Drummond customers this year. At a later date, we'll talk about the next year changes in a following webinar. So our agenda is to talk just an overview of HTI-1, and then criteria updates required this year, and then certification updates required this year, and then changes required beyond this year. And lastly, how can Drummond help? All right, so HTI overview, this is the full name of the rule. We're just going to call it HTI-1 for short. So you'll probably see that pretty much everywhere. The HTI-1 rule adds 4 dimensions to the ONC certification program. So algorithm transparency and DSI, as well as US CDI version 3, information blocking, and insights reporting. So let's talk about those. All right, B11 is required this year. So what is it? It's going to replace A9 on the base EHR. So developers that need to maintain base EHR should plan to do B11 this year. Developers that choose not to do B11, they'll just see A9 fall off of their certification at the end of the year. And I don't believe there's anything that they need to do. Decision support interventions actually pertains to 2 different kinds of DSI. The first is evidence-based. That one is a carryover from A9. And then the new one is predictive DSI. So let me add a note. Developers are not required to author, develop, or otherwise provide a predictive DSI to get certified. They still need to support the evidence base that they originally certified, but the predictive is not necessarily required. Developers just need to enable the selection of a DSI or provide a door. You can use the G10 EHR provider launch functionality for this. I think it's almost tailor-made. So it should show that is largely carried over from A9. There are 9 new source attributes in addition to the 4 that were already there. And then there is a new functionality just for the evidence-based DSI, where developers need to enable some form of user feedback capability that can then do a computable export and use elsewhere. The feedback workflow can be a separate workflow than the DSI interventions. So, there is some flexibility there. All right, so these are the 9 new evidence-based DSI source attributes. They're really all one of a kind, all of a kind. So you could say use of certain demographic data. And so if a developer is using a DSI that uses any of those data elements as part of the decision making, then that needs to be disclosed and transparent to the user. So predictive DSI, so this is the one where there's a lot more questions. We're hearing a lot of, what does this really mean? So predictive DSI has 3 aspects to it. It supports decision making based on an algorithm or model. It uses training data, and it produces some kind of output that has some useful information. So again, I'll remind everyone, predictive DSI, you are not required to author, develop, or otherwise provide a predictive DSI. simply make the door available. But if you do offer predictive DSI, then there are 31 source attributes across 9 categories to make available. There are additional source attributes that users can add that also need to be available, so there's going to be quite a few fields. A limited set of users need to be able to access the source attributes in plain language, and a limited set of users need to be able to record, change, or access those source attributes. And if they're not available, then developers need to indicate that they're not available. Another requirement for the predictive DSI portion is an intervention risk management practice that needs to be published for each DSI. There is 3 aspects to that developers need to include: analysis, mitigation, and governance. You are allowed to use the NIST AI risk management framework as your starting point for that. And so I would take a look at that. And then finally, on an ongoing basis, there is a maintenance of certification requirement that developers are reviewing these risk management practices on an ongoing basis. And there will likely be some kind of attestation for that. B11 will require an updated G3 SED report, so that I can attest takes some time, and so start thinking about that one. We are going to be working on some suggested tasks for the B11 SED, and we will have that available at a later date. Developers do need to rewrite or append their existing SED because they can only post one. So they can either do a brand new SED or they can just do B11 and add it into their report. This all needs to be registered by November 1st and attested with the SED report submitted no later than December 1st. Also, B11 will require real-world testing going forward. The next criteria changing this year is the G10 standardized API. So there's actually 3 different things that are changing regarding the standardized API. So we'll talk about the first one. This is the token revocation functionality. This needed to be in place as of the HTI-1 effective date, which was March 11th. So this will be asked in the next quarterly attestation, which I think Heather will talk about when that'll be available. There is a minor change to the test procedure, but the idea is that the token revocation needs to be performed within 1 hour. So, if developers followed the SMART IG, there was a recommendation access tokens should expire 1 hour. So if they followed the IG, then there's nothing to change there. So let me just say there's 2 methods to revoke. So developers are not required to explicitly change anything at this point. They are still allowed to manually revoke the access and refresh tokens as demonstrated when they certify G10. But in addition to that, this other method, it auto expires the access token within 1 hour. But developers still need to manually revoke their refresh token. Okay, so there is only part of the revocation is handled by this 1 hour expiration. All right, so next year's changes for G10 are US Core Implementation Guide 6.1.0 and the Smart Implementation Guide 2.0.0. There are some new resources on the US Core side, as well as additional must supports. And then on the Smart Implementation Guide side, Pixie, which was optional before, is now going to be required as of the end of next year. All right, so token introspection is also defined in the Smart Implementation Guide if developers follow Drummond's recommendation and built the Smart 2.0 token introspection functionality. Again, nothing to worry about. Capability sets, as far as the use cases go, the Smart 2.0 supports 2 additional use cases, whereas originally Smart Implementation Guide was 2 use cases. patient standalone launch and EHR provider launch. Now, developers will need to also support patient standalone launch and EHR or provider standalone launch. I'm sorry, patient EHR launch and provider standalone launch. There are additional capabilities that need to be supported that are labeled in the 8.1.2 section of the implementation guide. There is an exception though. Permission online and its related scope online access are not required. So the certification updates that are required in 2024. So the service-based URL, which we usually associate with the G10 criterion, is actually a conditions of certification requirement. So technically it's separate and it's not in the test procedure for G10. But the requirements around that are changing. A standard is being put in place for the end of this year, and the developers will need to meet that requirement using the FHIR R4 version of the endpoints and organization resources. They are not to use the US core versions of those resources because they're more constrained, so this is going to leave it a little bit more open. Also, Drummond recommended that developers use the endpoints resource to do their service-based URL last year, or 2 years ago. So if they did that, they have a good start. They may or may not have used the FHIR R4 as opposed to the US core version of endpoints, but there will be monitoring and enforcement by ONC on this. So the compliance person listed in Chapel will be contacted if there's issues with the service-based URL. And uptime stats will be tracked on lantern.healthit.gov on the Lantern site. And the expectation at the beginning is a greater than 90% uptime. That's not a requirement. It's not statutory. That's just that's what our cutoff is for contacting. That uptime percentage will be increased later. So expect to see that increased maybe in a following rule. The self-test service-based URL test kit is on Inferno. So there is this option for developers to test their implementation. However, we will not be using that service-based URL test kit during any kind of G10 testing, nor will developers need to perform the service-based URL test kit or provide a report along with their attestation next year. So that's only for developers to self-test. That is not related to anything that are certification requirements. That will be coming up in 2 different quarterly attestations. So in the Q3 attestation, developers will be registering their intent to do the service-based URL update. And then in the Q4 attestation, they'll be attesting that they have implemented the service-based URL standard. So for the remaining conditions of certification, let me hand it over to Heather.
Thanks so much, James. So some additional conditions of certification requirements as well. So finalized as a condition of certification is that a health IT developer must provide an assurance that it will not interfere with a customer's timely access to health IT certified under the program. So that's really broken down into a couple of requirements. One is update, which is where a health IT developer must update the health IT module once it's certified to certification criteria that's adopted as part of 170.315. And that does include the most recent adopted standards as part of the revised criteria that we're kind of walking through with relation to HTI-1. Also provide, so health IT developers must provide all health IT modules certified to the revised criteria to its customers. And then there's a little caveat in there about timeliness, which really should be in accordance with the time frame that's set forth with the changes, or in the case of brand new customers, within a 12-month time frame. So with the addition of B11 also comes, as James mentioned, some changes for assurances as part of that. So this helped kind of establish some ongoing requirements for products that are supplying these predictive DSIs, which kind of fell as a developer requirement rather than a product requirement, which essentially makes it fall underneath a condition. So these include reviewing and updating as necessary source attribute information, intervention risk management practices, as well as summary information that's provided through 17523 F1XXI. Now, keep in mind that as part of this requirement, if you offer DSI, we will be collecting a public URL summarizing the intervention risk management practices. That's going to be part of the attestation. So another piece was the real world testing. So this was a previous clarification that we kind of discussed beforehand that was actually just put into formal regulation. And it's regarding the real world testing for inherited products. So the clarification is really the need to report newer versions of certified modules within real world test results and plans, even if they aren't being updated until after August 31st. And this is really just to maintain the chain for inherited certification status. So as new versions come into play and older versions are withdrawn, they still fall under the requirements for real world testing, regardless of the date, because you are using that inheritance chain along the way. And depending upon timing, B11 will need to be included in the real world test plan that's being submitted at the end of this year. If you certify B11 prior to August 31st. After that, it's really optional if you want to include it. And the other small reminder I wanted to kind of make here regarding real world testing is that, B10 is part of real world testing. So most of you developers have certified to the B10, and so this will need to be included in this year's real world test plan that gets submitted for the 2025 year. And then I just wanted to make a quick note regarding the condition of certification related to information blocking, because that was also part of the HTI-1 rule. So the rule finalized a definition of offering health information technology or offering health IT for information blocking regulations that are related to the 45 CFR Part 171. And so more details of this can really be found in the final rule, but we wanted to kind of make a quick mention of it because it was a change in an update in conditions of certification. So another notable change was the discontinuation of additions. So this really establishes a single set of criteria that we now know as ONC certification criteria for health IT. So this alignment will really lessen confusion over iterations of additions and the timely updating of standards and functionality without it being tied to an addition. And it also really supports dates and timelines for criterion and standards. So previously, new rules would be established every few years, and those were requiring additions and updates to be adopted. With this new process, a new rule is published annually, and then those criteria updates will be adopted within the time frame specified, just to make it a little easier and more clear. Along with the removal of the addition, there was some chapel changes. So you'll see some documentation that the ONC has put out for the chapel, but these will be both visually and functionally. So first you'll notice, as mentioned in the ONC's developer roundtable recently, that all addition references have been removed, both within the search view and the listing. They did, however, leave a search capability to be able to search for older addition-based listings, but the default view will really just have without addition. But of course, you can search at any time for listings with previous additions. The other notable difference on the chapel is the ability to identify if the criteria has current standards associated with it. So you'll notice that there's a clock icon and if an update is required for a future date. And then a green icon will indicate that the criteria has met the requirement for the current standards. And if you hover over that indicator, it gives a little timeline of when that next update will be due. And then once that date hits and the standard isn't updated, it will turn into a red icon indicating that it hasn't met the requirement. So everybody right now is kind of in that there's an update to come. And then as you guys start to attest to those, we'll be updating them. So for now, the ONC has backfilled current information on the chapel, which is why you'll see that update icon. And then again, as we start to accept attestations moving forward, we will be updating these standards as you attest to them, and then you'll start to see those green icons as well, indicating that you're meeting the requirement for the new standards. And then the last change that you'll see as part of this will be some logo and language changes, because of course all the logos we've used up to this point had 2015 edition references. So moving forward, as you make chapel updates that require a certificate, you'll be issued a new updated certificate, which will include our new logo and the ONC's logo, stripped of the 2015 edition. There also is a slight change in the disclosure language that you see on the certificate, as well as what's on the chapel. The original disclosure language had a small piece in the beginning about the 2015 edition, and now it will be replaced with our new phrase, which is the ONC certification criteria for health IT. So just start to plan to update your web page accordingly so that you can insert that new language. Most of it remained the same. Again, it's just a small piece where the edition piece was stripped out. And so this one is really a revised criteria. So over the years, there had been discussions over the network time protocol and what could be used, and different standard versions that were introduced over time. And there was also even acceptable exceptions that could be used. And so moving forward, it was decided to allow any network time protocol to be used and not just ones originally specified. And so there really isn't any action to be taken on you guys as the developers, but you would just need to report through a quarterly attestation if you make a change to the network time protocol that was different from when you certified originally. So there's really not any retesting. It's just for our reference, as part of any other change to let us know if you do make changes there. But it does affect your basic auditing criteria and E1 as well, since that's kind of tied back to that auditing. And so just to quickly recap some timelines that are specific to 2024, of course, we have our token revocation, which should have been compliant for effective date of the rule on 3/11. Remember, this is attested to in the next quarterly attestation that I actually issued earlier this morning. So you'll see an additional question on there. And if you do have G10, you are required to please answer that. And then we'll be working with you as well based on your answer. So also note that semi-annuals will be opening on April 1st and October 1st. Quarterlies, of course, will coincide April. There's an extra one July, and then one October that kind of lines up with those semi-annuals. And then real-world test plans will be due again on November 1st. And B11 attestations will be due to Drummond no later than 12/1, which gives us an opportunity to review and get everything updated. And then, of course, the service-based URL standardization, which is going to be 12/31. So let's review some changes that are occurring beyond 2024. So there's two kind of main changes for the revised criteria. The first one really is the minimum code set standard changes. And so this affects multiple criteria, such as demographics, which are updating race and ethnicity codes and introducing even a few new code sets. There's also updating of SNOMED codes across criteria like family history, as well as some updates related to HL7 CCDA implementation guides, amongst a lot of other updates. And so I'm just kind of citing a couple examples here. but you want to make sure that you register by 11/1 and submit the attestation paperwork no later than 12/1. So this allows us to update your chapel. Now, keep in mind that you don't have to wait until the deadline if you've already made some changes. At any point in time, you can register and attest to the changes, and we can start to get those things updated for you on the chapel. So don't feel like you need to wait until the deadline comes. Again, you can attest to us at any time. And then the other main change really for the revised criteria that everybody's concerned with is the implementation of USCDI v3. So this affects the interoperability criteria mainly. It's like your B1, your B2, CDA, anything CDA related really. And so again, you're going to want to make sure that you register by 11/1 and then submit your attestation paperwork no later than 12/1. And again, there's no need to wait. As you implement these things, please register and get your attestations in. And so we can go ahead and process that for you. Okay, so going into a little bit about stuff that's being required beyond 2025. So the other big change that will start is the new insights condition. And this really allows the reporting in categories such as interoperability, usability, user-centered design, just as some examples. And this will ultimately allow performance measuring of EHR technology that's out there and certified. And so really the data collection will begin in 2026, and then the first reporting will start in 2027. So I know that's another one that's on everybody's mind as well. And so I put this slide in. This is the ONC slide, and it's really just a quick snapshot of the key dates for HTI-1 starting from this year, moving all the way into 2029. So 2024, of course, is really just your B11, which also includes your new assurances requirement, keep in mind, as well as the standardized fire endpoints. 2025 marks the year for the US CDI v3, as well as those minimum code standard updates. And then really 2026 all the way to 2029 for now is really just going to focus on the new insights condition and different stages of between data collection and reporting requirements on the data that's collected as well. And I know most of you are kind of still digesting the HTI-1 and everything that comes with that, but we all know that, if anybody attended HIMSS or they've been kind of looking at some of the information that the ONC is putting out there, that there is HTI-1 and it's coming soon as well. So we want to keep that fresh kind of in everybody's minds, just, aware of the future rulemaking that's happening. It's really going to focus on interoperability and standards adoption. Some of the other notable focus items is improving public health data, and then also just continuing in general to improve on APIs for things like EPA, patient engagement, care management, and coordination. So more information coming to that in the future. So be aware, make sure you're signed up for all of ONC's listservs as well as our information. Because as those timelines and information come out, they'll be sharing that with you as well as us.
All right, how can Drummond help? Yeah. New criteria selection frameworks, including B11 and the other changes, are now available on the Drummond website. There are also selected proctor sheets for G10 and a B11 proctor sheet that shows a draft version of what developers will need to attest to. So that does not include test steps or SED tasks yet, but we will distribute those when they become available. There's also our Drummond portal. Our knowledge base has been updated. And if developers have any questions, they can reach out to us through the portal on the support page or email their account manager. Another thing that Drummond will be doing is you'll be hearing from your account manager to set up a check-in call to answer any questions that you have and go over any concerns that you have about HTI-1. So expect to hear from your account manager, and if you're ready to go ahead and schedule that, feel free to reach out to your account manager now and get that scheduled. Also, this is Drummond's 25th year, and so we've been doing compliance and testing and cybersecurity for quite some time now. This is our philosophy as our comprehensive compliance partner. So we can offer all of these different testing certifications. So in addition to the ONC testing, which everyone's familiar with, we also do fire testing. Specifically, there's a new fireplace program, which will offer full matrix interoperability testing, as well as a fire client app certification. We have a new pediatric health IT testing and certification, as well as HIPAA risk assessments that we've been doing for a long time. DEA, or electronic prescription of controlled substances, is also a service that we offer. And so not all of our customers were aware of that, we're finding. In addition to that, cybersecurity, we can do pen testing and vulnerability testing. I mean, I don't know if anyone has not heard the news about a hack that's been affecting wide swaths of the healthcare system. So it's obvious that this is becoming important and that we need to guard our patient data from hackers who are nothing better to do than try to get it from you. All right, Q&A.
Perfect. I see a couple in there, James, that are related to certification. So I can just start kind of reviewing some of those. And so one of the questions that we got asked was, if you let A9 drop off the certification, would that impact base certification? And it does. So if you think about some of the other criteria where it was replaced, you had to make a decision to either remove it and then replace it with a new, or just get it removed. With this one, it's a little bit different. It's actually just going to fall off as removed if you don't do B11. But yes, it is part of base. So if you were not to do B11, then you would not be considered base EHR. So if you want to continue to have that, you need to have B11 in some capacity, because at the end of the day, when your customers are producing their CMS ID, it's got to be a compilation that includes the B11 in order to produce that, because it is part of base. I think that the point was made there just to make sure that you don't have to remove it if you're not moving forward with B11 for some reason, or you're using a third party. Just know that you don't have to reach out and formally remove it. But yes, if you are wanting to move forward with base, you need to make sure that you're doing B11. There was a question about conditions of certification. If a customer does not request an update and or refuses one, are we required to contact the customer and encourage them to update? So for that, you need to be able to do that, provide an update. If the customer decides that they don't want to update right now or at a later date, they just need to know if there's any CMS impacts there. But it's nothing against you at that point for the condition if they choose not to update. But if they come to you and they would like the update, you need to be able to provide it, and you need to be able to get them updated at their request. Again, if they don't want to right now, because there's only a 180-day period and they want to wait a little bit from an attestation standpoint, that's fine as long as they understand that. But you won't be put in any position under your condition as long as you're providing and updating to anyone that wants it. I hope that answers that question. And there's one in here about updating our website now with the updated logo and disclosure language. So as you update your standards and with B11, you can certainly reach out and we will be giving you a new certificate at that point. You probably can start updating your webpage now, but we'll be issuing certificates kind of as the requests come in to make the changes, any changes that require certificate update. So if you're getting a new version, even if it's before B11, you will be provided with that new certificate. And then as you make those changes with B11, we will be giving those new certificates as well. And then I think, James, there's one more I can take if you want to take some of the B11, but there was on a call I was on earlier this week, they said SED report could focus on the changes between A9 and B11. Do you agree? Yes. So there's no need to redo your entire SED for A9. You can utilize some of what's there and then just create the addendum for the difference, such as source attributes and maybe the feedback, but you just can create an addendum between the changes that made from the first time you did it to the second. The only thing that I would suggest is there's two ways that you could do that, because again, we can only upload one. So you can either make an addendum to your current report and add it at the bottom. And then within our Salesforce system, you can go ahead and make those updates with additional tasks, or you can kind of take those new tasks in your report and incorporate them within the A9 that you already have. But at the end of the day, we would just need one cohesive PDF that we can upload up to the site that kind of contains everything.
All right, I'll take a crack at these B11 questions. There are some tricky ones and some pretty advanced and specific to implementation questions. Is the use of health status assessment a yes or no answer, or does it require us to specify which one? So if we're talking about the evidence-based DSI source attribute, use of health status assessment, I can guess on this one. I can't say exactly what it'll be, but I would assume it would be what actual data element was used from the health status assessment. Can you provide some clarification between source attributes and the data points from the patient clinical chart that may be utilized to configure a new DSI? So yeah, I mean, in the evidence-based DSI, there are those data points which are going to be used for the intervention. The other source attributes, funding source, bibliographic citation, and so on, those will be already there. I'm going to need some clarification on that question. Utilize the create configure. Okay. Do you have to use all 9 attributes in decision support, or just know they are available? The 9 attributes from evidence-based clinical decision support, you do need to show them if they were used. So know they are available. I don't know if how you would define that, but it would have to be, transparent to the user what was used to determine the output that the DSI had. Can you clarify more details on what the requirements for the door are for EHRs that don't plan to provide their own DSIs? How do they support third-party DSIs? So that's a good question. EHRs that have certified G10 obviously have that EHR provider launch functionality already. Systems that are not G10 certified will need to work out some way to do that, where they can interface and provide those data elements that are required. Any alternative to Touchstone? So Inferno is the only test tool That's available now and will be available for US CDI version 3. If an EHR incorporates a PDSI application into their EHR for ease of use for their providers, would that meet the definition of supplied by? If the EHR has integrated this and is, offering it to their customers, using it in marketing, I think was the definition given yesterday. If they're advertising it or publicizing it as a feature, then yes, they are supplying it. Now, if it's something that the user added in, then they are not supplying it and are not responsible for the source attributes, but do need to have fields for those source attributes that users can fill in. For B11, what's the distinction between up-to-date plain language descriptions of source attribute information and the actual source attribute information? That's a good question, and I hope to get clarification on that soon. The door approach might look like what for the lay people on this call? So in G10, the EHR provider launch that was certified, it works as, in a sense, a button that the provider can click that launches a third-party application and provides the patient context to that application. So if there is an integration and the G10 EHR provider launch functionality is built, then it will look like a button somewhere in the EHR UI that will just open up a new browser tab or a new application, however it's configured. So B11VA1 and 2 reference DSI supplied by, whereas B11VB1 and 2 does not reference supplied by, which implies VB1 and 2 also applies to DSI created by EHR users and other parties. So CHIRT is only obligated to enable EHR users to access up-to-date plain language descriptions of source attribute information for DSI supplied by CHIRT, but has broader responsibilities to enable EHR users to access and modify attributes for DSI developed by other parties. Well, DSI developed by other parties that is being connected through their interface or their door. They need to provide the fields, but are not responsible for keeping that updated or filling them in. So as long as it's an other party, meaning it's not part of the CHIRT EHR technology, it's a separate third party kind of application, or is not sold as part of that system. There are required source attributes for B11, but often we need clinical data from the patient chart to create a DSI, such as BMI, weight management, smoking status, etc. Are these data elements considered the additional source attributes a user needs to have access to? The required source attributes listed in B11 aren't enough alone to create a DSI. So for the evidence-based DSI, if you're using those certain data elements, then that needs to be disclosed. The required source attributes listed in B11 aren't enough to create a DSI. I mean, that I can't say. New question, is the plain language description for DSI only applicable to predictive DSIs, or does it also apply to evidence-based DSIs? I think it's pretty specific. It actually says that in the rule. The plain language is part of one, is part of the access portion, and then the modify does not contain that plain language. So we could look it up, but in the rule itself, it actually says which ones it applies to. Furthermore, are the alerts for missing source attributes required for both predictive and evidence-based, or only predictive? It only says that predictive source attributes that are missing needs to be indicated. Forecasting is part of the F1 requirements. If the forecaster is supplied by a third party, does the EHR need to certify to B11? The immunization registers are currently not certifying. That's a good question. So an F1 immunization forecast and history, if you wanted to argue that the forecast is some kind of predictive or is evidence-based, I don't know, we would have to look into that some more. But if it's a third party, does the EHR need to certify to B11? No. Not unless they want to maintain base EHR. All right, B11 to C, what does feedback mean? Is feedback to developer from their providers, or is providers to patients? No, it'll be providers to the developer. So it'll be providers to the system that's collecting that feedback, and then that feedback needs to be exportable to wherever else it's going to be used. All right, I think that was all the questions. So yeah, so if I didn't answer your question, we don't have all of the answers yet. Some of these we'll need to get and are in the process of getting clarification from ONC, and some questions that are specific to implementations, we can't always give guidance. We can talk about what will pass certification, but not as much what a certain developer needs to do to a certain product to make it pass. So I hope that helps. I think that was all the questions.
I believe so. And so I would just say, just to add at the end, as James kind of talked about in the beginning, this was our HTI-1 overview. We plan to also have some concise webinars as well on some of the updates, related to cert updates, maybe some B11 and some others. So, look for some upcoming webinars to do a little bit of a deeper dive. And also, just look to some of our knowledge base and stuff. So as we get some of these clarifications, we'll be adding those in there as well. And like always on this slide, you can reach out to any of us to get, additional information or clarification on anything.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today. As Heather mentioned, up on the screen are ways that you can get in touch with the team via email or through the portal. And I think that is about it. So we hope you have a great weekend, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.